These are difficult decisions, and obviously there's more attention when it's the quarterback who's I'm just interested in winning.
The Broncos went to Russell Wilson in October and asked him to restructure his contract.
It's official, ladies and gentlemen. The Denver Broncos are very highly motivated to consummate the fact that this is officially the worst trade in recent memory. And while we did give you the initial report yesterday, the longer we waited, the more we realized that the storyline behind the scenes is more bizarre than you could ever imagine. So before we get to the content, we're starting to drop earlier uploads to channel members to preview like a day before the full upload goes up. If you're interested in that, make sure you check out our channel memberships program. Now that we get all that out of the way, break! We made $1,100 off of a $20 entry on Prize Picks. And it wasn't just me, it was everyone that followed these picks on my Instagram story. And the best feeling is the amount of people that made money as a result of this. I mean, bam, 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 bam! My DMs were flooded, so the best part for me was seeing you guys make money as well. But we're not done yet. If you haven't signed up for Prize Picks, use my promo code Mikerophone to double your deposit up until $100 on Prize Picks. And I give away my picks on a daily basis for free on my Instagram story and now my Snapchat story. We're having so much fun doing this. I'm so happy that I made you guys some money. And thank you, Prize Picks, for the sponsor. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? In our last video, we recapped how the Denver Broncos got here to begin with, starting with the bizarre Russell Wilson trade where they gave up Drew Lock, Noah Fant, Shelby Harris, 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, and a 5th-round pick to get Russell Wilson's services. Following the acquisition of Russell Wilson, they decided to extend him almost immediately before he took another snap. Bear in mind that he had 2 years left on his existing deal with the Seattle Seahawks. So you literally got Russell Wilson in a scenario where you could sit back and really gauge whether or not he still is who you're hoping he is. But alas, they decided to extend him. Now, again, the benefit of extending Russell Wilson early is if he still is the same version of himself, this gives you an opportunity to get his max contract out of the way and allow other QBs to consistently beat that price, which, by the way, it happened. If you currently look at the highest paid quarterbacks of 2023, Russell Wilson is currently in 7th place. Now, you could make an argument that he might have no business being in 7th place, but he's in 7th place before his 5-year extension kicks in, meaning that by the time Trevor Lawrence and Dak Prescott get extended this summer, and by the time future stars of the NFL get extended in the future, this is going to turn into a really good contract. But that's assuming Russell Wilson is still the same version of himself. We all know year 1 with Nathaniel Hackett was a dumpster fire. Russell Wilson was frustrating his teammates. I mean, we mentioned Melvin Gordon's death stare at him. We mentioned the fact that KJ Hamler got so frustrated at Russell Wilson missing his read that he slammed his helmet. It was a gigantic meme for the 2022 season, but I will admit he handled it with class and grace. I mean, at least on camera, Russell Wilson didn't deflect blame upon others. For the most part, he accepted the blame himself, even though he was a glorified punching bag for the media and the NFL for all the 2022 season. Even when Nathaniel Hackett got fired, Russell Wilson expressed empathy and respect and regret that he couldn't have done a better job underneath Nathaniel Hackett, even though I do believe Nathaniel Hackett was to blame for the first-year failure of Russell Wilson. So the Denver Broncos had no choice but to double down on Russell Wilson, trading for Sean Payton, who literally declared war on him almost immediately. Sean Payton was brought in and was asked what he thought about Russell Wilson having his own office, and he said this.
On the 30-second
Coach, Russell Wilson had a personal coach, Jake Hughes, in the building with access who wasn't on the staff.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with that.
How do you feel about players having their own people off the staff in the building, access to the players?
Yeah, that's foreign to me. That's not going to take place here. I mean, I'm unfamiliar with it. But our staff will be here, our players will be here, and that'll be it.
And while I do think it was smart for Sean Payton to set the tone right away, there were some things that Sean Payton did that I wasn't necessarily a fan of. For example, completely obliterating Nathaniel Hackett as a head coach, which, again, he wasn't a great head coach, but you didn't need to do that. And whenever Sean Payton was asked why he did it, he claimed that he had way too many lattes one morning, and that turned him into an asshole.
There's a pound of flesh for these guys, and as a coach, you stick up for them. And after a while, we're past that season last year, and you know, I said what I said, and obviously I needed it a little bit more restraint, and I regret that. That being said, what I told the team is, you know, if it can happen, and I think I'm pretty good relative to working with the media and pretty savvy, and I just had one of those moments. Jared's a good friend, real good at his job. 2 lattes in the morning, first one I see, and 40 minutes later, I'm regretting it. So,
and well, I will admit, Sean Payton was a huge upgrade at the head coaching position this past year, but it seems like he never was willing to give Russell Wilson a break. From the very beginning of the season, Russell Wilson played masterfully, even in his defeats. I mean, yeah, in week 1, he had 177 yards and 2 touchdowns to start the season, but he didn't throw any interceptions, and he had a 79% completion percentage. He did have a horrible game against the Kansas City Chiefs, but the Kansas City Chiefs are one of the top-ranked defenses in the NFL. If you look at Russell Wilson from a statistical perspective, you don't really need to be a genius to realize that the reason why the Denver Broncos are in this situation isn't Russell Wilson's fault. And this is coming from a guy that was roasting him in 2022, which made the decision to bench him all the more absurd. In our last video, we mentioned that this benching isn't just any other benching. Whenever you bench a player to avoid injury so his contract doesn't become guaranteed, just like what the Las Vegas Raiders did with Derek Carr, the Denver Broncos are trying to cut Russell Wilson. And they would actually admit this later on. So how did we get here? Well, it's all about money. And this is what makes them more incompetent than ever. According to Jordan Schultz, the Denver Broncos asked Russell Wilson to give back $37 million. Watch.
They beat the Chiefs. 2 days later, on Halloween Day, the Broncos come to Russ. You got $37 million in guarantees. We need you to defer that another year down the line. Says no. They say, if you don't acquiesce to our demands, not only are we going to bench you, but we're going to make you inactive. You're going to be inactive. What does he proceed to do? They beat Cleveland, one of the best defenses in the league. They beat the Bills and Vikings on prime time. They lose to New England. But over the last near 2 months, nasty situation. Today it came to a scratching halt when Sean Payton sits him down and says, we're going with Jared Stidham. You're no longer our starting quarterback.
So Russell Wilson said, I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm just going to cook. And to be honest, he did cook. He had a 3-touchdown performance versus Kansas City in week 8. He had a 2-touchdown performance versus Buffalo in week 9. He was able to beat Minnesota in week 10, threw for 259 passing yards. He was able to beat the Cleveland Browns, who are one of the top defenses, in week 11. I got called out in my comment section for the last video for not mentioning this, but there was a 5-week stretch where the Denver Broncos were back. They were on a winning streak. And all of a sudden, when Russell Wilson loses to the Houston Texans in his worst performance of the year, things started to trend in a different direction. He was able to beat the LA Chargers, but he lost to the Detroit Lions, and he lost to the New England Patriots, both of which he didn't throw an interception, both in which he threw for over 200 passing yards, both in which he was able to throw for 3 touchdowns combined. But Russell Wilson was still benched. Why? Well, Sean Payton is having a difficult time rationalizing this. Watch.
It looks like Russ is taking the brunt of the blame.
Well, I get that. And yet, I can't replace the entire offensive line. I can't bring in 5 new receivers. And if it continues over a period of time, then there'll be another guy here talking to you as well.
Now, you might be wondering, why are you following this up so quickly, Mike? Well, according to Diana Rossini, Russell Wilson is expecting to be cut by the Denver Broncos in March. For almost 2 months, the quarterback has been starting, knowing that the organization was most likely going to move on from him after this season. So this is absolutely absurd, but there's way more. Rossini continues to say that the Broncos reached out to Wilson's representatives in late October and explained that Wilson would lose the starting job and be made inactive for the rest of the season if he did not defer the injury guarantee trigger date that he has for 2025. Wilson has $37 million in injury guarantees for 2025 that will become guaranteed on the 5th day of the 2024 league year in March. Lawyers, including some with the NFLPA, were involved, and no changes were made to the contract. It was explained that the Broncos never told Wilson if or when they would bench him this season. He just played until he was told this morning he was no longer starting. If you think this is crazy, look at Russell Wilson's liked tweets. First of all, he liked the aforementioned video from Jordan Schultz. He liked this tweet from Fantasy Fanatics that mentions that Russell Wilson is now being benched despite outplaying some of the league's biggest stars, like Russell Wilson in 2023 versus Mahomes. They both threw for 26 touchdowns. Russell Wilson threw for 8 interceptions, whereas Mahomes threw for 14. They have the same yards per attempt, and Russell Wilson has the edge in rushing TDs. Although I will admit, Patrick Mahomes does have 1,000 more passing yards than Russell Wilson, important to note, but he would continue liking all of these aforementioned stories about him. The one on the Broncos approaching Russell Wilson 2 days after their win over the Chiefs and told him that he would be made inactive for the rest of the season if he did not adjust his contract. And I'll be honest, I'm very disappointed in the Broncos organization at this point. You fixed Russell Wilson. I mean, you got him to a point where his contract's even worth it. He's going into year one of a very good contract. I mean, the guy is about to be the 9th highest paid QB in the NFL starting next season. You could win with a quarterback that is the 9th highest paid QB in the NFL. That's an undervalued contract for a quarterback that is completing 66% of his passes, throwing for 26 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. I wouldn't say he's the problem. To start out the season, the defense was the problem. I agree that the offensive line is the problem. And I will say, outside of Courtland Sutton, he hasn't really had help in the wide receiver department either. My biggest problem with this whole situation is you set to achieve something, which is fixing Russell Wilson. And you fixed Russell Wilson. But now you're opting for a dead cap hit of $85 million in 2024. Or if they do it post June 1st, $35.4 million in 2024 and almost $50 million in 2025. How does this upgrade your team at all whatsoever? The only way this upgrades anything is if you're looking at your roster and you're deciding to trade every piece away for draft capital and start from scratch. And if you move on from Russell Wilson, that's pretty much what you're doing. But if you're doing that, why bring in Sean Payton to begin with? You have to make a decision at the end of the day. You want to extend Russell Wilson prematurely so he could have an undervalued contract in the future, which ended up paying off. He does have an undervalued contract, very tradable contract, by the way. You wanted to bring in Sean Payton to fix Russell Wilson, and he did. But now you want Russell Wilson to give back even more of that money for some particular reason. And despite Sean Payton admitting that this isn't fully his fault, they're making it his fault. It seems like the Denver Broncos don't have a direction at all. And when you don't have a direction at all whatsoever, at a specific point, you can't point the blame finger at the head coach. You can't point the blame finger at the quarterback. You can only point the blame finger at the general manager, and the general manager is usually taking orders from ownership. There were some really brilliant football decisions made to save and resurrect Russell Wilson, and now they're just ruining all of it. So if they want to release Russell Wilson, by all means, it's going to make for fantastic content in the summer. I can't wait to see what their plan is going to be for next year, because if you are going to bring a rookie scale QB into a situation where you have a dead cap hit of $85 million, you're pretty much putting him in Bryce Young's situation, but even worse. I mean, Bryce Young was only in a situation where he didn't have a wide receiver one, and he doesn't have a first round pick next year, so he's a little limited. But I don't think we've ever seen a scenario where a team decides to take a dead cap hit of $85 million and then draft a quarterback to put in a terrible situation, which, by the way, Russell Wilson was able to make something good out of a bad situation. So let me know what you guys think about this in the comment section down below. I could talk about this for literally an hour. I might go live on TikTok and talk about this because there's just so much to discuss. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.